Okay, good afternoon. I am Anto Budiarjo. It is 3 o'clock on Monday, so welcome to Monday Live. This is something we do every week to help us get it through the pandemic and figure out what's on the other side. Profiles for everybody is on mondaylive.org. Just a reminder that all of the views expressed here are personal, not of any company or organization. Please do post questions and comments on the chat and Q&A and the survey at the end if you have time. This slide deck I'm showing you will be on mondaylive.org as soon as we're done. So today on the agenda, the main topic is who owns the data. I think that should be an interesting conversation. Before that, we'll just have a chit chat about news and trends. So a few slides that the members have put up. This is from Ken. The November issue is out, and I was looking at the website of this robot thing. It's looks kind of cute and frightening. Mark is talking about to mask or not to mask. I'm sure he'll fill us in on that. John talking about the rents at urban apartments and what's going on with offices and Chicago breweries. Interesting.
Trying to overcome it, got to sell beer.
This is true. This is actually an old article that I found, but it just sort of occurred to me that data is a key part of COVID. So, you know, since we're talking about the ownership of data, I thought this was kind of interesting to put up there. And Anno is his favorite subject.
The monkey owns the data.
So I'm sure we'll come back to this. Naturo. And that is all the slides that we have. So let us get ourselves going. Hello, Alper and Gina as well. So who wants to start?
I'm having video problems, so I'm in the dark.
You're in the dark.
We won't comment on that, Anno.
So Ken, do you want to chime in on what you're doing now in November on automated buildings?
Okay, well, we started the theme a bit back, the navigating the never never, which all the things we said we never would do, and we're now in the midst of them. The data side of it, we had an article and it's talking about, you know, right from the edge controller right up to Microsoft Azure. And that's sort of something I think we hadn't really thought about is some people don't actually believe they're in the data business, but what they don't realize is that the way everything is configured now, they are in fact in the data business, and even the simple setup stuff, their backnet objects and stuff are now floating around somewhere where they don't know. So yeah, who owns the data and how is it protected, and cybersecurity is becoming a big thing. We had a couple of quips there too. One was the idea of taking shopping malls and turning them into senior citizen communities, which was kind of an interesting concept. And then the other one that caught my eye was the robot that had the ultraviolet light on it, and he basically goes around and sterilizes and makes safe facilities. So that was kind of an interesting poke as well.
Sterilizes the humans?
Yeah, that too. I'm sure.
Cool.
Look directly into my eye.
Mark, you're talking about to mask or not to mask. I didn't actually follow the links.
Yeah, so interesting links. It's an architectural firm, and another firm has a nice video there of people sitting in an open office. And when a person coughs, what the effect is of the people surrounding them. It was really eye-opening for me in that we've heard about it for, you know, the last 7-8 months or so, but to actually see this and it put into a video and see how the air, when somebody coughs and it actually disperses, just for me was actually mind blowing, and how far it went within a open office environment. And so I encourage everybody, take a look at those two videos. There's a part 1 and a part 2. And it just, again, proof that, you know, as we get through all this, that mask, you know, got to make your decision to mask or not. And to me, this is telling that you must mask, you should mask.
Great, thank you. John, your couple of pieces there on really sort of evolution of.
You know why I post those things is, you know, I consider, you know, lots of things I read every week, I consider them dots on a chart that we're trying to draw a line through, right? So, you know, 2 of them are negative, right? Rents are dropping. That's not well, some people may think that's a good thing, right? Because they can get apartment what they need to, or condo what they need to, but there's a financial effect. The other one is, you know, the people preaching that, you know, no one will ever go back to the office, which, you know, jury's out. We have no idea what human beings are going to do after this, right? We don't know. It's a plausible argument, but we have no idea. And the third one is how companies are trying to overcome, right? Breweries, you know, which are known for people congregating, having a good time. You know, they're trying to do things, and they specifically mentioned HVAC improvements as part of what they're doing. So that's why I threw those out there. More darts or more dots on the chart that we'll try eventually. Maybe we'll see the line here. Well, what we could trace through it, you know.
That's cool. I saw another article about the UK is going back into lockdown.
Yeah.
And a lot of the pubs have decided to sell beer at 99 pence a pint before the lockdown, just to just to get rid of their beer, maybe.
Get rid of inventory.
Yeah. Okay. Any other? We'll wait to talk about the monkey later in the main the main part of the show. Any other sort of comments? What's going on around the country?
I think it's scary that numbers are going up, right? You know, I remember trying to go back to when this was all very new to us and what we saw, the trends we saw happen in March, right? And the thoughts of, you know, how it can affect people in our household and et cetera that we know, you know. It's not a good thing to see the numbers going up, no matter how you view it. Numbers are going up.
Didn't we just top the world in country with the most in a day yesterday? I think it was yesterday, today.
We're always leaders.
I guess. Yeah, sorry.
Well, yeah,
Yeah, we also probably test more than anybody, so it's not sure what all that means. But I find my granddaughter is in a private school here in Richmond, and they have all their students have returned at all grade levels up through high school. And as of last week, they had 1 case of a person coming down with COVID. They have a very well-defined program for how the students come in, how they're spaced, whether they do or don't wear masks, and they've been able to manage this. They have literally a little app you can run on your phone. You can see all the statistics for your classes and all of it, and which to me bolsters the argument that if you are intent on having people be in buildings, you can find a way to do it.
Mm-hmm.
But you've got to have a plan and a process that can mitigate the risks. And the proof is in the pudding. They've been in school for almost 2 months now with 1 case.
Mm-hmm.
No teachers, 1 student across all grade levels.
Steve, I have a similar story in that my wife is the librarian at a K-8 charter school here in Douglas County, Colorado. And they've been 5 days a week in person since the beginning of school.
Right.
And they've not had a single case.
Well, you see, you're even better than my granddaughter's school. So I just think we're so frightened by this thing that we forget to ask the question, how can we solve the problem? And we can solve the problem. Yes, it requires a certain amount of sacrifice, a certain amount of self-control and discipline. But if you do those things, you can operate successfully, is the point.
Yep.
Yeah.
That has a lot to, when it comes to schools, doesn't have a lot to do with what's going around in the ecosystem surrounding that school in terms of their families and what they do?
Oh,
at home
yeah, sure.
and that.
You know,
So-
charter school and a private school, the parents are taking a much bigger role. There's a whole drop-off policy about how the kids show up in the morning. I mean, it is highly controlled, and you've got good.
Are they filtering out
participation of the
ahead of
parents.
the child entering the school then? Or
I'm
are
sorry?
you saying, I said, are they filtering and identifying people before they enter the school? Or is nobody associated with the school ever caught COVID?
Nobody associated with this. Well, none of the students and none of the teachers. I don't know about the parents. I can't tell you about the parents.
Okay, so,
So
go ahead. Yeah.
just changing the subject a little bit, I think that's really very interesting. Last week on my phone, I got a prompt to install the Contact app,
Oh, yeah.
very specific to North Carolina, but I'm assuming that it's also in other states. Has any of you seen that or installed that?
Yeah, I have.
A couple?
Yep.
No, I'm in Texas, Anton.
No, okay.
Enough said.
What virus?
What virus? What are you talking about? You guys are nuts.
All right. Any major thing to report from you, Therese, from the Silicon Valley side of things on the left?
No, I'm excited about today's topic. If I had done my homework, which I should have, I would have entered, like, I went back and read Brian Turner's article from September, from October, on the new, you sent around the thing from Microsoft on their digital twin modeling language. It's interesting to go back after reading that and look at what Brian Turner said in those subsequent months in automated buildings. It's interesting to listen to Ken and Brian talk to Ken Smyers and Eric, and just sort of like rounding up my brain around. And I guess, we experienced it last week at Realcomm, how at least Microsoft and Google seem to be aiming the cannons directly at each other, with Haystack sort of caught there, both copying what Haystack's going to do. And then I don't know if you guys have any insight. I don't have any insight on the Swedish effort, Realcomm or Realcore, real estate. I forget what it is.
Core, yeah.
Yeah. So I'm really looking forward to today and being kind of enlightened, just like listening to all those things and seeing, it really does seem to be coming to some sort of head.
Okay, so let us turn the subject to who owns the data. Who wants to start? So I'm going to ask each of you in turn. So who owns the data? Who you think owns the data?
Go on, show my monkey.
Okay, so Anna, you go. And I'm going
I'll get it out of the way.
I'm going to bring Brian Turner into the fold as well, because he's agreed to join us to do this. But go ahead.
I just had there's two interesting articles that I put on the slide deck. One, there's a famous case. It dates back a while. It's actually dates back to 2011 in Indonesia. A famous photographer was taking photos, and he set up some cameras, and then it turns out this macaque monkey took a couple of selfies of himself using the camera and stuff. So of course the photographer took that and he took it home and he started creating some merchandise and putting it on his website. So yeah, you can buy a mug and a cup and a mouse pad and that sort of stuff with the monkey. So then of course that came to the attention of Peter. So he was making money off the selfie that the monkey took of himself. So that Peter became aware of this and kind of took him to challenge and said, well, no, the monkey owns the selfie. It's his photo. He took it, albeit with your camera. And this went all the way up to some circuit courts, up to like 2017, when one of the circuit courts actually said, yes, the monkey owns the data. In other words, owns the photo of itself, and any money that this photographer was making was due to the monkey, which was then given to Peter to help protect the monkeys in the wild and stuff. Interesting case. And the interesting part about it was, you could argue that the photo is a you know, representation of data, and it's the monkey's likeness, even though he took it and it was the photographer's camera, and he monetized it in the end. But the fact that it got all the way to a court tells you how serious the nature of owning data and copyright, for that matter, really is. But that second article is also interesting in that it was actually a little bit more germane. It talked about there is in fact multiple people you talk about a building, there are really multiple people who've got taps into the data, you know, whether it's the tenant themselves, whether it's the building owner, whether it's the utility, you know, if you're cable, gas, water, whatever. In fact, it talks about it's a multi-dimensional problem in that it's not even one person potentially owns it. Interesting article. If you click on the link and look at it from, wow, there's multiple aspects of this, and and they talk more about not so much the data, but what actually gets produced by the value of the data, right? Who owns the production of the value of the data? So if I've got temperature sensor values and I'm doing some analytics on that, sure, do you own the actual temperature sensor values, but is the spark or the rule or the algorithm or the result that I create from that temperatures, do I own that because I put the effort into generating that piece of additional information, which is not the temperature sensor values itself.
Say, Anto, there was one other thing in my mail today that I really stopped and perused, is the CABA. They had Harbor Research, it's probably in everybody else's junk mail too. A long article about Harbor Research effort made under CABA about the smart home as a service, where that's going. And just, by way of comparison and by way of, I don't know, whatever happened to Phil Zito, but said it months ago, that the smart home is really, because people are spending so much time at home, really going to become more and more important to our discussion. And so I took some good time reading that from Ron Zimmer and the CABA crew this morning about smart home as a service, and who owns the data. You read the bullet points and it's who owns the data. So I recommend that too.
So sort of that's great. I did see the email fly past. Just talking about what you were saying, Anna, in terms of processing of the data that creates value. I think that's really Jim Lee. That's really your perspective on owning who owns the data kind of argument. Do you want to build on that?
So we've been in the analytics business for about 20 years now. And initially, when we set out, we had to find out how to represent this contractually. And where we came out and where we've been for many years is that the customer owns the data specifically. They own their data, and we own the data in aggregate. So as we look across all building types, mechanical equipment, etc., everything we've learned or been able to derive in the algorithms we made is basically our intellectual property. We often go to market with a professional services contract. And if you look at any consulting contract, you'll see that the company hiring the consultant owns the work product. So now you have to be very careful about defining what the work product is. The work product is the deliverable for the analytics. It's the results of what you found and how you can move the customer's business forward with. But the algorithms and the work that you did to build the system belongs to the analytics company. So that's how it's come out over the years, and that's how it stayed. In the history of the 20 years of being in the business, we have had one customer ask for their data when the relationship ended. Other than that, we still have all of the data for all time for everything that we've ever analyzed. And there's very little discussion of it. Now, as time has gone on, the other interesting thing is that our very large customers refuse to use our contracts when they negotiate an analytics deal with us. They want to use their contracts. And oftentimes this is not thought about, contemplated, and there actually is no language as to who owns the data in many of these engagements.
So maybe I can sort of pass it on to you, John, because you're an analytics, but you're really a provider of analytics platform as such. So
Yeah.
may have a slightly different view.
Yeah. So I think Jim, brought it out. I'm going to say it a different way. I think there's more than just the question of who owns the data, right? I think there is who manages the data, right? Who owns it clearly is a question, but then there's another category of who gets to use it. And I think that's what he was saying. But one of the things we've seen, and in fact had customers ask us about, is, well, do you have everybody's data and are you doing separate analytics, right, on it? And do I get the benefit of those analytics you may be doing across the portfolio? Our business model, so that's the whole use of the data, right? You could use that aggregate data to learn things, but when somebody wants their data back, they get it. So I think that's an important distinction, because there's some business models out there that really are enabled by companies getting lots of customers' data and learning things from them. And that's a separate factor. Our approach is we produce software for people who want to do this, and we have customers with all these different business models. They're installing it and implementing it like a system integrator, and all they're doing is systems integration. The customer not only owns the data, they're the ones who manage it and work with it, get their analysis from it. And then there are others who set up services to do things along the lines of what Jim does as well. But I definitely want to agree with Jim on the other thing. Big companies, they think they have the better contracts and they have the bigger lawyers and whatever, so they'll drop a contract, and they actually haven't got the experience, right? It isn't a matter of who's tougher. They don't have the experience. There's huge gaps, and it's kind of like, okay, I'm going to spend my legal fees educating you about the language you should have to protect yourself on data. I already had that in the document I gave you that you won't use, right?
Right.
Okay, so we'll go back and we'll add those sections in at great legal expense to come back with something that's virtually, they could have done markups to the one we started with. But I think points out maybe the biggest issue. The issue isn't who owns the data, because I think customers can find people that would conform to what they want. I think the bigger issue is, do customers understand the questions they should be asking? Do they understand the legal issues? Do they even know, oh, geez, do I want to own it? Do I not want to? They're not experienced enough in the issues related to data. In many cases, not all, but in many cases, we see they're not, even prepared to have a full discussion about that. And I think that's a big issue, because what that can happen is, there was kind of a subtext in who owns the data, like somebody's mad they found out they didn't, right? You didn't say that, but there's and you know how that happens? It didn't, let's take malintent out of it, right? It doesn't have to be somebody who's trying to lock it up. It happens because expectations weren't set. People didn't understand the different layers and facets of this. And so they found out later they didn't own the data, not because anybody did a sleight of hand, because hey, you gave me a contract, said you didn't say anything about owning the data, you don't own the data, right? So I think this is a whole separate set of education that customers need to know about and think about.
So Brian, can I just throw it to Brian? Because I'm willing to bet the beer that the tech clients that you deal with don't have those sort of issues on their contracts. They probably understand the value of data.
Yeah, I was listening to that and I was thinking, man, I wish I had all these customers that don't know what to do with data. No, we have very specific requirements, and even in the non-tech companies, some of our larger clients absolutely know how to contractually obligate our responsibilities for the data. And it breaks it down into a few different things. So one is the source data. So who owns the source data? And then there's the algorithms themselves, and that comes down to background IP. That's ours, sure. The algorithms, the results of the algorithms using the company's source data is not ours. They will say every single time that you cannot use results from our data to inform or improve a competitor, for example. So it could be a commercial office building, a retail facility, a multi-tenant banking facility, and they don't want us to use results even. They have no problem with us using our algorithms that may have been enhanced by what we've learned with their data. They don't protect that, but they don't want their source data becoming part of a larger pool of source data that we use to then help the aggregate. They're certainly not, I would say in most part, not looking to really help the industry as a whole when it comes to data. And then the final piece is that we're not allowed to then sell that data or the results of that data. And I would say all of these things we have tried, and in some cases are successful at striking some of these concepts out of some contracts, but in others, you're just not. If you want to play with that client, you're going to respect and hold true to those kinds of requirements. So yeah, I would say there's a lot of different ways to look at this. And you know, when I think I heard this on maybe it was Nick Warren's podcast, but one of the people he was interviewing about, you know, if you really want to call data the new oil or the new utility, then that means there is a way to then move this data as a monetary thing, right? And not just using the data to generate analytics or using the data to generate additional data, but actually being able to make this a marketable thing in itself. As source data becomes marketable, because from an analytics position, whether it's us or Jim Lee or Anno's company, the more data we get into our algorithms, the better our algorithms are, the better the data that's resulting from it. And if I had a source of anonymized, real HVAC data across the world in all kinds of markets and all kinds of different use cases with different occupancy bases, I could have a whole lot better results to apply to all of my clients. So that source data is extremely valuable. And I think for those companies that don't know that yet, they'll know that fairly soon. And I do believe that they're going to go through the effort to protect it. And even in the areas where they maybe didn't contractually obligate their providers not to use it, if there becomes some big monetary value of that source data, you can bet they'll be in court just like the monkey.
Right.
I kind of look at this as echo what Brian said a little bit, what Jim said, what John said, and I kind of look at it like this. I ask when I'm meeting with clients and hopefully, and then determining the question, who owns the data? I ask several questions to myself. Is there a difference of who owns it and who should own it? A couple other questions is, if I'm a building owner and I try to put myself in their perspective, it's my damn building, it's my data, I own it, done, no more discussion. Then to the Brian and the Jim and the Johns of the world, I pay you to use my data to provide insight from data using your analytic platforms. You own the analytics on the platform, I own the data, plain and simple. And I think that's a little bit what I've kind of heard the three of you kind of say, but I put it in my turn. And then I think a part of this whole discussion on who owns the data needs to be who maintains it. Is there a difference between maintaining the data and actually, quote unquote, owning the data? And then a couple other questions, and I think we brought it, Therese might have brought it up a little bit here, is that, or as we as an industry start to embrace more of an as a service model, who owns that data in that type of model versus the traditional model in which for the most part we have today? And then finally, I'll just kind of sum up with this, is that from a building owner's perspective, I think they're always looking to increase the value of their buildings. And data now is a building asset. And so that asset goes into the value of what that building is. Therefore, the owner owns it. And let's say I'm going to sell that building. Going with that is all the data that I have collected, maintained, et cetera, and the analytics and everything else, the insights that people like Jim, Brian, and John have been able to produce. Again, once those analytics are done, I own that as a building owner, and that increases the value of my building to somebody else. So instead of $10 million for a building, maybe I can get $12 million for it because of the data. So
Mark, there's one aspect that you brought up. So as a service, if it's software as a service, I think the building owner still owns the data, regardless of where it ends up. It's still the source data. Where it was collected is who owns it. Where it's starting to become tricky is when we start offering the entire solution as a service. So we're putting in the sensors at our cost. We're putting in the monitoring solutions, whether it's metering or indoor air quality, or even some stuff on the mechanical side of the world. And when it's sold that way, I think you do get into contractually where the service provider can actually own the data, because ultimately the building owner is buying everything as a service without a capital cost. And even though the sensing and the measurement is happening inside that building, it's happening with things that building owner doesn't own. So it's I think that's when you start to really get into some negotiating power from a service provider. And then the chat that's on the text here about being able to anonymize this data and make it available to the community, the collective community. I think that's not going to happen anytime soon. This data is very valuable to all of us actually performing analytics or operating buildings. And like you said, Mark, the more efficient, the better, the healthier your building is, the more valuable it is as a rental property, as an asset itself. So that's one of the reasons I don't believe this data will ever just be anonymized and free, at least not in the near term.
So
I'd like to,
you were going to jump in.
I was going to say I was going to agree with that point, which is that ultimately, with security and IT security coming down very quickly on the industry, I think that these outside companies that hope to globally harvest data from this vertical are going to be sorely disappointed when what they really run into are security roadblocks where they're unable to gather the data because the data is so proprietary that it's now locked up with security certificates almost entirely across the industry.
Yeah, so
we've heard that story let's call it investment type companies thinking, okay, so you have the data from every building you've ever touched and you can use it and all that. No, it doesn't work that way. And, quickly, well, why don't you? Right. And it's like, well, you gotta, I would agree. I think it'll be a very long time, if ever, that trend sweeps our domain, whereas you might find it in other domains. I don't see building owners being willing to go through that, and you run up against roadblocks that it doesn't necessarily mean you couldn't present the argument to them why it would be helpful to them or would be beneficial to the world. The problem is, yeah, that's a good point, John. The answer is still no. Right? Yeah.
And then is there a risk when you when you share the data, especially with, and you got the permission, with folks that really don't have the domain knowledge of, let's say in our space, the built space, and are they going to take that data and then create incorrect stuff or outputs from that they don't have that domain knowledge, the expertise and things like that. And I would also, I would say that there is some risk to that.
Hey, Brian, on that, when you were saying about the building owners and Mark, you're in the same space, just tying it back to my second article, you say that the building owner owns the data, but in the article I was reading, there's a tenant in that building. the tenant could argue, no, the data is actually mine. It's not the building owner's to sell in the first place. So, you know, when I come in and when I turn on the lights and when I set the set point is all up to me as a tenant. In fact, I own all that because I generate that data, not the building owner. So is the building owner even in a space where he can sell the tenant's data?
Yeah, it's, I think again, that gets down to the lease, right? So if the tenant actually did build out their own space and put in all those sensors, the building owner doesn't have that data anyway. When the building owner builds out the infrastructure and they've included that, that as part of their building amenity, then the building owner does own it, in my opinion, unless the lease is written differently for that specific tenant. But I would say that, I mean, the argument you're bringing up is valid, but normally the building owner doesn't have that tenant data anyway. So I can tell you right in my space, the building owner has none of my data. I've got lots of data about my space the building owner wants, and I've offered them to pay a fee to get it. And they don't. Or I've offered, even if they allow me to integrate the house system so that I can actually use that to better inform my own performance around what we're doing in our suite, and they won't agree to do that. So, but I do think that this tenant owner scenario and this relationship is probably the first place at where we will start to see data sharing and data collaboration, because it's in both of our best interests to actually have those two data sets merged. And so I do think that's one area that we could see some movement on who owns the data and maybe more collaboration.
So,
You know, I think if I could just interject here for a second, I think part of the issue is there hasn't been enough legal challenge to all these different aspects of this, right? So there's not enough precedent set out there. The monkey, yep. There's a few, but not enough to cover everything, I don't think. But the monkey is a good example. So I had a lawyer tell me once, we were talking IoT data, temperatures and settings and schedules and things like that. But the way he said he usually looks at it is, replace whatever sensor that was with a video camera. How would your customer, your client feel then if there was a video camera taking video of their operation or their office or whatever it might be? And think of it from that standpoint, which I thought was a really interesting perspective on all of this, and who has the right to do what with that information, right? Which is the monkey, ultimately.
Yeah.
Coming off Realcomm, I was just going to say that Realcomm, you know, there was a different dynamic in all the property management firms, the Brandywines and the Granites and the, which is different than what you're talking about, Brian. And you could definitely hear and see different members of, say, the Brandywine team or the Granite team showing up for the digital twin session that wanted to talk about ontologies, et cetera, and the people that showed up for Steve Fay's cyber. And the cyber people were exactly as Jim Lee described. We absolutely own the data, but that's Granite or Brandywine or CBRE or JLL that are property managers. They don't actually own the building, but they appear to be building their own platforms, their whole own platforms. You know, in the case of ExxonMobil or in the case of Brandywine, to do all this monitoring for all the buildings they have under management. So they're also coming in the middle, and I think that they'll be more adaptable to, you know, negotiating some sort of data sharing thing. But they definitely, their IT people, in the case of Steve Fay's cybersecurity thing, the IT people said, we absolutely own the data and we're not going to share it with anybody. And the same people were talking to the Microsoft guy about digital twin and opening everything up, but they were different people within the same organization. The other point was Ken's point about the COVID, like these equipment, you know, it would be like an airline scanner or airport scanner. You walk in and it checks your temperature and sees if there's any COVID on your surface. And that they were very clear that they were anonymizing the data and they were going to send it right to the local hospitals, which makes perfect sense. That's a different use case. But that idea that Brian's just said will never happen, anonymizing the data and sending it somewhere else, there was a use case already that I think they'll be doing that immediately. Because it just
That's
makes sense.
HIPAA comes into that scenario, right? Which is another whole set of privacy laws.
That's a little bit different. Steve, did you want to chime in?
Yeah, so one of our first customers, I negotiated this ownership in the contract with them. And, because we're providing cybersecurity protections for control systems, they were very concerned about their data getting out. They didn't, because they're using our platform to assess their risks, and they don't want anybody on the outside knowing whether there are risks and what those risks are, obvious things that they would want to protect. And so it was very explicit in the contract, and we kept it in the contract that all the data is the customer's data. And if they leave our service, the data gets destroyed and it's gone, right? So that talks to what Brian was saying in terms of source data. What I was able to negotiate with them is the idea of this anonymizing of the data to across multiple clients to provide insights into risks that they may not be, that we're learning from another client that may be of value to them because they have the same situation. And I was able to win that argument and build that into the contract that we have the right to anonymize the data and use it for those purposes. Which I thought, but I don't have enough, as John talks about data points. I don't have 1,000 customers to say I've been able to sell that concept to, because we're too young of a company. But I also want to point out that there's a difference between, what's happening right now from a cyber perspective is, and I know Bill Bain's not on the call today, is this idea of who gets to get access to the data at all, period. Forget about what the data is. From a security standpoint, the most important thing is to have tight control over where the data is going. So, locking down your systems so they don't have public-facing IP addresses, and that there's zero trust networking established between users and the data. That, I think, is the starting point, regardless of where the data is being used. You need to first address that risk. Then comes a secondary risk of how valuable is my data for whatever purpose it might entail. And so I think that's the first step in this whole evolution, is to make sure that customers have confidence in who has access to the data. Then when they grant that access, okay, now what happens at that juncture? So whether it's the digital twin scenario or it's an analytics scenario or whatever it is, or in my case, it's assessment, risk assessment. What can I do with that data once I have it? And I do think to the degree that each of us as providers who depend on data to do analysis, to the degree that we can drive acceptance of anonymizing the data and using it to improve our service and our product, is something we should fight for, because it provides value to everybody. It's a win-win. Yeah, I hear, Brian, the argument about that one customer says, I'm not going to help my competitor, but that's a bit short-sighted perhaps. So I think it's worth fighting for.
Isn't that the answer to that though, Steve, is what's the financial incentive, right? I mean, no one in this country does anything without some financial incentive. We don't do it for the betterment of people. We do it because.
But the point being, Anno, is that if analytics help John Petsy's business come up with better ways to reduce energy consumption or reduce maintenance, that's the financial incentive, right? Everybody gets to benefit. Why would you want to restrict that to just your building? Because now you can't gain from the learning across other customers.
I agree with Steve. If we compare, like if we say data is a house, and whoever has access to the house basically owns the data. Everyone has talked about the legal terms, but the physical accessibility of the data is a concern, I think. So we do fight it with different means. People put rings to their homes. That's one way to protect the home, protect the data. We encrypt the data. If you're installing applications without any encryption and some malicious person gets active to it, they own the data. It happens every day throughout any of the industry, and they do encrypt their data on top of it to make money out of it. So physical access is very important, I think, outside of giving access to normal companies who generate value out of that data.
So
back to smart homes.
Sorry.
Back to smart homes. Phil Zito actually posted an article over the weekend that Google is now doing some analytics with their Nest, and they will send you notifications when your HVAC system is acting up. So there again, who owns that data? It's my data, it's my house, but yet Google's leveraging that, right? And educating me about there's a potential damage or overage charge, or, you know, my system could break down. So it's an interesting dance that I think everyone's going to do over the next several years.
That's a bit of a different, that comes back to Brian's point though, Scott, about the difference there is Google provided me the thermostat in the first place, right? And so they provided me with the sensor, and I, somewhere along the line, I checked a box that says you can do whatever you want with my data, you know, when I installed it and hooked it up to the,
or are you paying additional service fee for you to be notified? And by doing that, you've given them permission to access your data. And then for an extra $10 a month, you get these notifications.
So one of my perspective on this is to do with a question: who owns the data? Quite often, if you ask the wrong question, then you're never going to get the right answer. And I actually have a problem with the word own, because I'm not sure data is ownable. There's data that's somewhere. It's an issue of control and access and use of it. So I think just thinking about it as ownership is problematic to me, because data's there, data's outside in the world. If there's a Walmart 10 miles away from me, and there's a number, there is a number of cars, there is a number that represents the number of cars out there. So that's a piece of data. Who owns that piece of data? Nobody.
But you look at the extent that people go to not get Google with Google Street View, right? You look how much effort Google Street View did to fuzzy out pictures of people and fuzzy out number plates and everything else. You know, even though it's a camera that you could drive down the street and pick up whatever you want, but they went to a lot of effort to fuzzy all that stuff out, right? Knowing that this is going to be a challenge if you picked up a crazy photo of me, you know, with the mistress in the back of the car or whatever.
So they've punted on the question. They basically,
yeah.
There's a whole thing too. If you start to compare the parallel to like patent protection or copyright, for instance. So one of the basic tenets in copyright protection is that you enforce that, right? You make sure you track down if somebody's using your logo or your phrase or whatever it might be, it's your responsibility. So if the customer owns the data, is it their responsibility to make sure that my facility is secure and who has access and who doesn't? And if there's a breach, am I responsible or are they responsible?
Right.
In fact, that's interesting. Sorry.
Just quick, my son, who's a copyright lawyer, I asked him about this before getting on this conversation, and he reminded me that there is no law with regards to data ownership. There's a lot of law to do with copyright and patents, and there's obviously law about owning things, but there is nothing that says about ownership of data.
Which is the monkey thing. He was actually based on copyright.
Correct.
And in fact, to your point, Tracy, that actually came up in the court case because the judge said, well, if I grant copyright to the monkey, how is he going to enforce the fact that he's got copyright? You know?
Yeah. Can you imagine Joe homeowner trying to evaluate whether Google is securing his data properly or her data properly?
So another question that has come to my mind as a result of this conversation is we talked briefly about the digital twin. Who owns the digital twin?
So to
I
me,
would
the
assume
digital
that
twin is the processed data, right, from the raw source data.
Well, it also depends on what you mean by the digital twin.
Okay, have at it, ladies and gentlemen.
I think that's a separate discussion, but yes, you're right.
The phrase is, ladies and gentlemen of the jury, have at it.
Yeah, but the digital twin, to me, like I said, I think it's the processed of the source data, right? It is a re-representation of the source data that I've created. So it's a different set than the original source data. It's just a new representation of that.
Yeah, a digital twin in my mind is actually just like holding a mirror to the physical thing. It's just a digital version of it, in which case, like a mirror,
the mirror does the algorithm. The mirror is the algorithm. The mirror is the transformation piece, right?
Right.
In terms of usage, it feels like digital twin, the discussion quickly goes to smart city and bigger aspects like that. I was just listening again to those two, and I don't know how many of you guys were in the same sessions, but the digital twin session that happened at the end of the day on Thursday, and the one on cybersecurity, where you had some of the same companies saying completely different things. But the reason, let's call it Brandywine Realty, analogous to a JLL or CBRE, said, well, we want the digital twin because, we're going to share all this data with the city. And, and we know that that's true, that water, the pipes underneath will be able to share our water data, we'll be able to share and so that's why we really want this, Microsoft leading or Google leading, whoever's going to, whatever they think is happening. That's when you get into digital twin, I think there is an even more imperative for openness for the smart city application implications. And when you're in the meeting that was Steve Fay hosted, which is about cyber defense, you really want everything pretty nailed down, and you want to own the data, and you don't want any new switches open to enable a smart city application. So they really are already working at odds.
So we haven't heard from Ken or from Gina. I don't know if you want to chime in on this, either of you.
Well, my only observation too is that I think is this piece that's moving with the processing, moving to the edge and combining with these large databases, Amazon and Microsoft. I think a lot of us are much deeper in the data business than we ever imagined. And actually the home market is another example of that. So I think some people might be watching this banter that you guys are going on here. That's amazing. Actually, I'm learning lots of sort of the pieces of how all of this fits together. And I think they've been kind of ignoring it and saying, sure glad I don't have to think about that. Well, I think you do have to think about that because in fact, it's everything we touch is now turning to data, and it's being manipulated by somebody else. So we have to think about how we're going to do that. So this is a great conversation. Just keep on talking.
So Anto, if you're right about I'm sure you are, what your son is saying about there's no laws around data ownership, then really the provisions are going to be around what you do with the data, not about who owns it, right? So the contracts are going to be leading to that kind of a discussion as opposed to the ownership per se.
Yeah, that's my point. Is that it's about control and access and use of it. Yeah, that's all you can do with data. I mean, having it sit there, it doesn't appreciate in value or anything like that. Yeah, use it.
But Brian, that's very different than what you were talking about with your contract experience, where they're actually calling out that they claim they have ownership of it. It's interesting that their lawyers felt that they could claim that right.
Well, just because there's no law that is currently there doesn't mean you can't contractually obligate it. And so, but again, like I said, our contracts lay out ownership, use of you know, they lay out all of those aspects that you guys were talking about. And obviously use of the data is key here. But I, you know, just in the chat window, been going back and forth. And I do think that there is some methods for building owners to increase their willingness to participate in anonymizing data. One is obviously they feel like they need to be protected because you can imagine, you know, what could have happened if indoor air quality numbers were out there and they weren't protected from that data from some potential lawsuit. So there has to be some protection there of sharing their data. But then there also, I think, needs to be more programs like we see in Australia with the green building score. And if you can actually get it to where a score of your building from a data perspective and your willingness to share it can actually lead to you gaining your building growing in value and being able to drive a higher NOI, then you're going to see the you know, the oceans will open up, you know, with regard to data flow. And I think that, you know, I've heard, and I don't know how true this is, obviously not working in the Australian market often, but if your score, like, you know, is evaluated quarterly or every month even, and your score directly impacts your rents with your lease obligations to your tenants, so that if you've got a score of 5 in January, you get max rent from everybody, but if you're rated at a 4 the next month because you've turned off your data pipe or you've stopped or your sensors have gone down, so you no longer can produce that data, that now everybody's a 4. And so everybody's rent automatically decreases that month. You get those types of things going into play, then you're going to start seeing a whole lot more data sharing going on. And I think that I've heard talk in that regard. So at least I know the ideas are out there. Whether or not they can actually get all the way into implementation, I don't know.
So I kind of wonder, maybe as a closing question, the actual value of data. I think Brian, I think you were mentioning that, you know, if a building was worth 10 million and with the data is worth 12, then, you know, 20% is a huge deal, right? I wonder if it's that kind of number or whether it's like a millionth of the value of the building, in which case nobody's going to care ever, right? So I don't know what the range is, and I don't know if anybody does.
It'll likely come down to a comparative situation, right? All other things being equal between two buildings, but I can prove mine is more energy efficient and will save you X amount of dollars per month in your costs. Does that drive up the value of my building? Probably.
There is a study by BOMA that actually proves it out with calculations on NOI and asset value that does it. And of course, it was to use the data to make improvements in the building, so it wasn't just the data alone. But yeah, this has been validated by non-vendor entities.
But do you recall what kind of value it had, sort of in that range?
Significant, 5 to 10%, a reasonable application of analytics to achieve greater efficiency, 5 to 10%. I'll try to track it down for you.
Okay, that'd be great. All right, well, we're at the top of the hour. Any aha moments, and just to close this out, anybody want to share?
I really appreciated Jim's experience and the insight of the various pieces as it goes through things, because I think that's conceptually a really important part of what we're all talking about here.
Yeah, my perspective is I think we still need to find the real value proposition for the building owner to share his data. I don't think we've cracked that nut. I think if we can find that value, then sharing of data will open automatically.
Okay, so with that, let's call this a wrap. Next week we have Naturo the monkey as the guest.
I think he's dead, actually. Sorry.
Who inherited the value? That's what I want.
That actually came up in the court case as well, Tracy. They talked about his descendants. Yes.
Oh man.
All right. Well, thank you. Thanks, Brian, for joining us. Thanks everybody for being here. Our video will be up tomorrow morning, and see you next week. Bye bye all. Bye.
Later.
Bye bye.